The reality of Somalia existence and secret tactics of 64 years long. Somalia is not a country, it's a failed project built on the idea of a non-existent third entity, meant to be called the Somali Republic. Somalia did not just commit genocide against the Isaac community, it launched a full-scale campaign to erase Somaliland from existence. Landmines, aerial bombings, mass executions, this was not just war, it was an attempt to wipe out Somaliland's people, making it easy to invade and commit demographic change. All while seizing a strategically vital location, by wiping out an entire indigenous population and stealing their homeland. Somalia's systematic genocide against Somaliland reached horrific depths, with attempts to use chemical weapons in 1989 as part of its quest for a final solution to the Isaac problem. In January 1987, Major General Morgan, a key figure in Somalia's genocidal campaign, sent an official military report to his father-in-law, the genocidal dictator Siad Barre, recommending final solution measures for Somalia's Isaac problem. This death letter was a chilling blueprint for ethnic cleansing, suggesting the systematic extermination of an entire indigenous people to pave the way for Somalia's annexation. This document reveals the premeditated nature of the genocide and how it was seen as a strategic solution to a political problem. An absolute violation of humanity masked as statecraft. The brutality of this attack reveals the lengths to which Somalia would go to fulfill its expansionist goals, seeing the annihilation of Somaliland's indigenous population as a means to an end. And even today, Somalia continues its assault, not with bombs, but with propaganda, erasing Somaliland's rightful history and denying its people their sovereignty. This is not just ethnic cleansing, it's a calculated, long-term occupation disguised as diplomacy. This map represents the territorial extent of Somalia, an entity whose sovereignty is questionable under international law. Somalia's statehood was never formally established and is based on a failed, unratified union with Somaliland. The area shown here is what is legally recognized as Somalia, in the absence of its territorial false claims over the Republic of Somaliland, an independent and sovereign state. On July 1, 1960, Republic of Somaliland's independence and recognition were needed to give Somalia legitimacy, as Somalia was still under Italian colonial rule. While Somaliland was already an independent country that had gained its independence from Britain, yet that union was never legally valid. The Somali Republic was a theoretical construct meant to merge Somaliland's sovereign territory with the non-state Somalia. A merger that never came to existence because there is no treaty was ratified, and the union itself was illegal. Now, the Republic of Somaliland, a fully de jure independent and recognized state, is being asked to surrender its sovereignty to a non-state entity like Somalia. A failed entity that's never had proper credentials to be recognized as a country. How can an independent, sovereign, and a de jure functional Somaliland be expected to submit to a territory that never legitimately existed and which is still failing to meet the most basic requirements of statehood? Failed Somalia did not become a legitimate state by accident. It needs the Republic of Somaliland's existence and recognition to legitimize its own empty claims to authority. A sovereign, independent nation vs. a failed non-state. For those who are not up to speed, Republic of Somaliland is a legally sovereign state that has never truly lost its independence since gaining it on June 26, 1960. Despite being annexed and forcibly taken over by non-state Somalia under the idea of uniting the two to form something called the Somali Republic, Somaliland has remained a distinct country with its own governance, economy, and legal frameworks, in line with state continuity. The illegal union with Somalia was an unratified union, an annexation, not a legitimate treaty. Somalia, on the other hand, is not a recognized state under international law. It is the entity that failed to meet the legal conditions for statehood and illegally claims Somaliland's recognized sovereignty. The core issue here is not political, it's legal. Republic of Somaliland holds all the rights to its territorial integrity and existence, while non-state Somalia is the one that needs to face the world's legal obligations to establish itself properly. International recognition for Somalia is an ongoing farce, overshadowing the undeniable fact that Somaliland was and continues to be an independent state. Even as Somalia clings to an illusory vision of a unity that never existed, and it's a clear violation of international law. Since the African Union already acknowledged in 2005 that no ratified union existed, Somaliland has a firm legal standing. The One Somalia fantasy is just political fiction. Failed Somalia, as we know it today, did not gain its independence on July 1, 1960. Instead, it was seeking independence, and the only way to achieve that was through a union with the already independent and sovereign Republic of Somaliland, which was already an independent country with international recognition since June 26, 1960. Now, when non-state Somalia collapsed in 1991, the Republic of Somaliland restored its independence from June 26, 1960, and began functioning independently and legitimately. So, how is it that Somalia, a non-state entity with a fractured history, can claim to inherit sovereignty over the de jure Republic of Somaliland? In reality, if international law were applied fairly, Somalia's claim could easily be seen as an illegal occupation rather than legitimate governance. The whole narrative of a One Somalia is essentially a political fiction designed to steal the rightful sovereignty of the Republic of Somaliland. If the rules of international law were respected, Somaliland should be the one recognized, not Somalia. Some argue that the union was voluntary, but that's just a convenient myth. The plan was to create a new, joint entity called the Somali Republic, but that never actually happened. Why? Because Somalia, desperate to gain independence, hijacked Somaliland's credentials and unilaterally submitted them to the UN under the name Republic of Somalia, effectively erasing Somaliland's sovereignty and annexing the country. The international law does not acknowledge voluntary unions in the way Somalia claims with Somaliland. I'm talking about the legal standards for how a country's sovereignty and territorial integrity are treated. In international law, the Union of States is supposed to follow specific legal processes, especially when it comes to the transfer of sovereignty. Voluntary unions are not just about agreeing in talks. They need to be 1. Ratified by both parties in a formal way. 2. Explicitly defined in international treaties and agreements. 3. Recognized by the international community. In the case of Republic of Somaliland and Somalia, there was no formal treaty, no official ratification, and no clear, binding agreement. The union was not a legal, recognized creation of international law. Instead, it was an annexation. One entity state forcing itself on another state under the guise of unity. Think about it this way: international law doesn't just automatically assume two countries volunteering to unite. Instead, sovereignty is something inviolable. And any attempt to take it or merge without proper legal procedures would be seen as illegal under Jus Cogens norms. That's why Somaliland's claim to independence is not just a political stance but a legal right. Its statehood has always existed since 1960. And Somalia's claims are based on an illegitimate annexation that didn't follow proper legal processes. And even today, non-state Somalia shamelessly upholds this annexation, falsely claiming Somaliland as a part of its failed entity. But let's be real. How can an older, sovereign country be part of a non-state that never had independence credentials and was still under colonial rule? Somaliland existed as a distinct nation for thousands of years, long before and after its brief protectorate status under Britain. The real question is, how does a collapsed, illegitimate entity like Somalia have the audacity to claim ownership over a country that was never theirs to begin with? The world is backing a failed fraudulent entity. We live in a world where recognized, sovereign nations like the Republic of Somaliland are being pressured to abandon their independence and submit to failed states, and for what? The idea of One Somalia. A dangerous relic that forces an independent nation to submit to annexation and be under a dysfunctional collapsed system that never properly existed in the first place. Why should Somaliland, a democratically governed and resource-rich country, be asked to surrender its sovereignty, earned on June 26, 1960 to a non-state that doesn't even meet basic criteria for legitimacy. Somalia, in all its instability and historical failure, has no moral or legal authority to claim what was never theirs to begin with. The One Somalia fantasy risks normalizing territorial expansionism and sets a dangerous precedent for other regions of the world. Somalia's questionable independence. It is important to consider that Somalia's independence is itself questionable. Instead of truly gaining independence, Somalia's formation was largely centered around trying to merge with the already independent Republic of Somaliland. In this context, Somalia is using Somaliland's independent credentials and UN seat to assert itself on the international stage. Despite not having gained statehood in the same manner as the Republic of Somaliland, which was an independent entity since June 26, 1960. Somalia is the true imposter in this scenario, hijacking the legitimate independence of Somaliland, which was recognized worldwide. Now, they are audaciously labeling Somaliland as a breakaway region, when it is simply reclaiming what was rightfully its own. It's a ridiculous and absurd case of historical theft, with non-state Somalia trying to rewrite the narrative and erase Somaliland's sovereignty to maintain a political facade. The real irony? Somalia is calling the shots on a seat in the UN that should never have been theirs to begin with, leveraging Somaliland's independence to legitimize their own non-existent statehood. The world needs to wake up to this insanity. A theft of statehood. When Somaliland restored its independence again in 1991, it did so as a continuation of the same state that existed in 1960. The legal and historical links back to 1960 make it clear that Somaliland's statehood has always been intact. And it simply chose to reassert its independence when the annexation by non-state Somalia collapsed. On the other hand, Somalia is engaging in theft of statehood because it has wrongfully claimed ownership of the identity, legal treaties, and sovereignty that rightfully belong to the Republic of Somaliland. Somalia is trying to erase the distinct legal existence of Somaliland and falsely equate its statehood with Somaliland's independence. Despite Somalia not having met the same legal conditions for statehood in 1960. Essentially, Somalia is stealing Somaliland's statehood and presenting it as its own to manipulate international recognition. The diplomatic recognition given to Somalia is fundamentally flawed because, as we've established, in legal terms, it doesn't exist. This is why Somalia pushes the secessionist narrative so desperately. It enables them to mislead the world and cover up Somaliland's rightful statehood, perpetuating a false political story. Non-state Somalia's goal is clear: erase this history, suppress the truth, and claim sovereignty over a state that was never absorbed into theirs. If the world understood this fundamental reality, Somalia's unsteady diplomatic claim to Somaliland would have no leg to stand on. In essence, Somalia is trying to gaslight the world, rewriting history and masking the truth to manipulate global perception. Their claim is not about protecting territorial integrity. It's about blocking the international community from investigating if Somalia itself an actual state or not. What we have been seeing from Somalia is not a territorial dispute, it's a struggle for control over a narrative, with Somalia doing everything in its power to maintain a false narrative, misleading the world and continuing to lie on Somaliland's legitimate legal statehood. Somalia is not a state. It's the one that actually needs recognition from the international community and to fulfill the international law to achieve their statehood. The country that meant to be called Somali Republic never legally came into existence, meaning Somalia did not automatically inherit statehood when it collapsed in 1991. Somalia is not just a failed state. It's an international fraud, and the world has continued to pretend that Somalia is the rightful inheritor of that independence. In reality, Somalia's existence since 1991 is not just a mistake. It's an international disgrace. A failed non-state that still begs for foreign aid, while Republic of Somaliland, a real state that has endured brutal genocide, a military occupation, and under the harshest sanctions for the past 64 years, somehow thrives against all odds. The world has been duped into propping up failed Somalia, an entity that was never meant to be a state in the first place. It's the most failed state on earth, yet the world continues to support its fraudulence. Somalia is not just asking for recognition, it's demanding legitimacy for something that was never lawfully established. The true anomaly is not only that the world forced a sovereign de jure Republic of Somaliland to seek re-recognition, but that non-state Somalia's illegitimate statehood has not been exposed for what it truly is, a mirage built on international fraud.